I have to give a proper introduction to Dr. Allan Bacon because he is someone who is extremely generous with his time first and foremost. If you ever do a search for Dr. Allan Bacon on podcast host platforms, you're going to find a lot of episodes. But secondly, um, he is someone who is a positive influence in the general fitness industry because where a lot of people will make their content that makes people feel worse, you generally, Alan, you generally help people get a little bit more clarity as to the nuances of things, and you're very good about if you've changed your mind on something, or if there's any inaccuracies, or if the data has evolved at all. You're good about staying on top of that. So I just wanted to pay tribute to that before we get rolling, but welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you for having me on. I really appreciate you inviting me on, Chris. I find that these are the most fun part of my week as far as like educating people go. And it's because whenever I get on with smart, other coaches and everything like that, it's a really good way to figure out, what are you doing that I can bring into my own repertoire? What am I doing that you could pull into your toolbox? And I think that everybody can benefit from these types of conversations because you get a lot of good minds together and it can come out to some really good information.
Absolutely. So I have a hard hitting question, which I'm going to start us off with, and it is why do you think that smart people still fall for dumb diet advice?
If we're talking about general population, right, we're not talking about the person that is an educated registered dietitian or PhD in nutrition. And so I think that intelligence has a broad span of meaning, and you can be a generally intelligent person, but if it's a topic that you're not educated on, there's no wonder there's confusion in play. And particularly when the body is part of it, when nutrition, fitness, how we feel, how we perform is part of the equation and the question, I think that people will largely believe, I know my body. And the reality is you don't know your body. And research has shown that over and over and over that all of these things that we had assumed were true for long periods of time because that's our experience just end up not being true. When you put things into a controlled situation and we start to get a little bit better information out of it, some things that we thought were the case were just not the case. And one of the things that you had said was you would like the fact that over time, I'll say, okay, we were wrong here. And then we change our minds. And this is a very distinct thing in fitness and nutrition is that the information is always evolving. And some people look at that erroneously and they say, well, if the information is always evolving and things can be wrong, then I should just do what I think feels right. And unfortunately, I think that can kind of lead you down the wrong path because most of the time, um, it's we have our own expectations, and expectation effects make a big difference. That really does a huge that has a huge effect on how things work. I mean, the placebo effect in fitness, nutrition, all those different kinds of things can be a very dramatic thing. And so when you talk about, hey, there are these really intelligent people that may be getting caught up in some of these, scams or misinformation or whatever it is, I don't blame people for experiencing that because there is so much information out there and it's very hard to vet who may or may not be putting out proper information. And because we are an emotional type of person, we're emotional beings, we like to fall into what we view as our preconceived notions. And sometimes our preconceived notions just aren't the right answers as far as fitness and nutrition go. And so this is why we fall back on controlled research. Whenever we have adequate controlled research in a realm, that trumps our feelings. When we don't have controlled research, anecdote can make a lot of sense. When we have controlled research that suggests that two different practices are a wash, whether you do one or the other, it doesn't really matter. You get the same outcomes. Then our anecdote really comes into play. But if we have this controlled research that is completely contrary to what we believe, and it's very well done, well, then it might be time for us to take a step back. And as intelligent people, we can say, hey, I don't always get it right. And that's okay. That doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with you. That means that when you're given new information, it's better information, you figure out something that's different than what you thought, you make adjustments, and that's okay. And I think that this can be a very good thing for people that are looking at this and they're saying, hey, I view myself as a smart person. I don't think that I could be tricked or maybe even conned, where some of these people are trying to con you because they're trying to make some money. And people don't like that feeling of, oh, I fell into this. But that's okay. Consistently learning is what's really important. And just because you might have accepted something as true that wasn't true doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with your character. It just means, hey, it's time to make an adjustment.
Hmm. I mean, that was a multifaceted answer, which gets me thinking to the next thing here. Within the fitness space, there's a lot of people who are good at marketing. I find myself falling into both categories. I'm proficient with helping people with fitness, but I'm also helping people with marketing. I have to admit it. But what I find comes up is that you'll get a show where the host isn't an expert in the space that they're speaking to.
Mm.
And it could be anybody. I'm not pointing fingers at any specific show at all. It's just their specialty sometimes has a disconnect from the subject matter that they're talking about. And then the person in charge of marketing it is going to pick like the clickbait phrases, the things that really
Hmm.
get people's attention. And then
Yeah.
the audience is going to latch onto that and make this connection that that's the absolute only solution, when in some cases you listen to the nuance of the episode and they may have explored more nuance, or you think about the experience and the exposure to the different solutions that that person had when framing the question, and you start to see like there's so much more context to this. But then from a coaching perspective, how do you relay that to general population to be able to explain that there's all these layers to what they just heard, that it's not necessarily 100% wrong, but it's also not 100% right?
This is a tricky thing because people are like, well, this person has, such a large podcast platform, or they've got so many followers on whatever social media platform it is. And that lends a false sense of credibility, unfortunately. And we should never be using things like podcast size or follower count as a good sign of credible information. Unfortunately, I think it's been proven over and over again that that's probably not a good indicator. Popularity is typically based on entertainment value rather than the truthfulness of whatever the claims are. And so if you're in a situation like this, and we had just talked about if a person is intelligent, typically, well, how are they supposed to understand a topic that might not necessarily be within their wheelhouse? And I think that the most important thing when you're looking at this type of thing as a general population type of person or somebody that doesn't really understand the full breadth of evidence about a topic, if you have somebody that you trust, and your question is, hey, if you've got somebody that comes to you, and we're assuming that either they view me as either their coach or maybe some form of authority figure, the most important thing that you as a general population person can ask them is, okay, explain your stance on this topic. Explain why they are saying exactly what they're saying, and explain why that might not be the right interpretation. It's either not the right interpretation for that client at the time, it might not be a right interpretation for a practical outcome in whatever they're trying to suggest. But I think that the big thing here in the social media space is being able to explain both sides. If you can explain both sides, you fully understand the topic.
Mhm.
This can help you get past some of those pitfalls, because even if you talk to these people, they may or may not be misleading you intentionally. We hope that they're doing it unintentionally if they're wrong on the subject. If you talk to them and you say, okay, well, show me proof for whatever your claim is, and they show you proof, and you're not an authority on that topic, it seems like that's the right answer. But if you know the counterpoint to that, then you can understand why that might not be the right answer. So by asking somebody if you can explain your side, their side, and why one may be more right than the other, you get a better idea of what's actually going on in that subject. And so whenever you're talking to these people, I think it's really important to ask for both sides of that argument. Um, and what I've typically found is that those people that are making the misrepresentation, whether it's intentional or not, they will usually stick to their side and then disregard the opposing viewpoint. And it's even better when people have controlled research to be able to back up their stances. But a lot of times you've got to be careful, especially if you don't know how to read research, because they will present research and it may not necessarily show exactly what they're claiming it shows. Or it may not be relevant under the circumstances that are typical or under your circumstances in particular. And a good example of that would be something like, branched chain amino acids. If you go out of your way to find evidence to say, hey, do branched chain amino acids do things like increase recovery? You can 100% find it. I can present that to you. But then at the same time, I can say, don't buy branched chain amino acids. They're not important for recovery. It's not really going to help you. Both of those are true. And the nuance is missing. So if I'm somebody that wants to sell you branched chain amino acids, I show you those studies showing that they improve recovery. Those exist. What they're missing in as far as the nuance goes is that when protein needs are accounted for in a day, and even modest protein needs, I mean, like 1.1 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per day, seems to negate these benefits from branched chain amino acids. On top of that, one of the things that branched chain amino acid manufacturers and sellers don't mention to you is that they can contain calories. They contain about 4.65 calories per gram. They're not legally required to list this on a label, so every branched chain amino acid product will say 0 calories, despite the fact that they've got the same calories per gram as table sugar. And so when we look at the research will show that when you compare a branched chain amino acid product to a non-caloric control, they show enhancement to recovery. When you compare it to an isocaloric control, a product that has the same calories, they provide the same benefits to recovery. Or there's better benefits to certain things like sugar. And so the answer becomes a little bit more nuanced. It's like, well, if you really need this help in recovery, why aren't you just taking sugar? Like, shouldn't a Gatorade work? It tastes better, it's cheaper, it's more readily available, but that's the type of thing that's not shown in the nuance. This is just an example of the way that you can manipulate data. And if you don't present the entire situation or you don't understand the entire situation, it can be very compelling to, buy the branched chain amino acid product. So this is why you talk to somebody that has a stance that might be opposite. And then you say, okay, well, can you explain why their stance may not be 100% correct, or why that might not be correct under my circumstance? And this is where you can get that nuanced answer. And yes, this is a long run on way to explain this type of thing, but that's a good example of something that could be done. I could easily come out here and say, an amino acid product is going to increase your recovery. And I could give you dozens of studies that show that. I'm just neglecting to tell you that if you're eating a modest amount of protein per day, which you should be doing, if you are getting an adequate amount of calories per day, your recovery's the same anyways. And then you're just wasting money on this. And in fact, you're probably getting more calories in your diet than you think you're getting. Now, hopefully you're not, overloading the branched chain amino acid product, but this is another thing that comes into play. If you start to follow these recommendations without doing a little bit of due diligence, you can cause some potential problems that you may not experience, that you may not know that you're experiencing. And so this is a pitfall of this is a trap for people. And unfortunately with social media, there's so much information out there that you have to really understand how to navigate this realm in a situation that maybe in the past we've never had to worry about this. You had people like doctors in the past, and they told you something, you would essentially just take their word for it. Now we have to question everything because social media is a business. And when somebody makes a claim, and what you had said was, they'll take an entire podcast and they'll do these clickbaity cuts from the podcast. That's to sell the podcast. That's to sell the views, because even you just viewing their products is money. And so we've got to be very, very we've got to be we've got to question everything
Hmm.
essentially. And when I say we need to question everything, I want people to question me, when we make claims and say, hey, can you show me why this is true, or why you're saying what you're saying? And I think that anybody that's putting out information that doesn't invite people to be critical of them is probably people that you should be a little bit wary around.
Hmm. Absolutely. I mean, that covered a lot of ground, and there's a few things that I want to branch off from there. So, one of the pieces is I have worked with a lot of people who are going through a stage of menopause, and there's a lot of things that come up for them. And then they
Mm-hmm.
go and they listen to podcasts, and I'll take a very similar approach where I will try to lead with empathy and compassion and understand where they're coming from and why they would be looking for the
Sure.
podcast and whatnot. What I found as a dude, I had to build more tools for my business to kind of help me take an approach to this that could be non-biased, so that it could kind of come from a neutral approach. So what I did was I built like a custom model on ChatGPT where they
Mm-hmm.
could upload like the transcript of the podcast, or they could do a query of like the host or the guest, and then it would run it through sort of like an equation of peer-reviewed research, credible sources, body of evidence, and then I created like this scale that was like 1,000 point scale based on like credibility and practicality of the information. And then I also had it using just kind of like compassionate coaching techniques where it kind of like leads with a question to kind of empower the person asking for support. And then I have a framework that makes sure that it refers out to the qualified experts. So if it's asking stuff about like pelvic floor health, then it gives a
Mm-hmm.
referral to seek out a pelvic floor health specialist. If it's talking about something where they should be seeing their family doctor, or any doctor that is specific to the concerns that they have, then it gives that referral out as well. But I found that that's kind of a way to add a little bit of an edge to our ability to support people. But I'm wondering,
Mm-hmm.
having heard all that, can you detect any flaws to this kind of a tool with coaching?
I mean, this is not an answer for coaching. What it is it's an adjunct. And if it's being used as an adjunct, I think it's being used correctly. And so if you're using this and you're saying, hey, this is something that I'm providing. I mean, if they're paid clients, hey, this is something that I'm providing. I think that this is a great place to start your journey and your data gathering for whatever the topic is, and then please come to me afterwards and ask me any questions that you have. I think that that's great. And the ability for this to work is going to be entirely based on how well you program it. And so you can never predict if this is going to be a super successful thing or not unless you program it correctly. But assuming that you're programming it correctly, I think that this is a wonderful use of a GPT model. I think that this is great to be able to get people answers very quickly and to be able to allow them to kind of explore through the answers themselves. And I think that that's kind of cool because as you're going along, down these avenues. I mean, this is kind of like getting lost in YouTube, right?
Mm.
Where you start on one topic and then by the end of the night you're looking at, dogs that are firefighters and you're like, how did this happen? And so it's kind of leading you down the same thing. So this gives people the ability to learn on their own and it can be fun. So I think that this type of model is great. As long as there's the support there to be able to provide some nuance that maybe the Chat GPT model or whatever GPT model you're using, as long as there's that nuance support, then I think that this is a great use of these new AI models.
Well, I mean, I definitely appreciate that feedback. The thing that I've been trying out, and if anybody's listening to this and curious and they want to try out this model, just send me a message on Instagram. But the thing I'm doing it is utilizing it as sort of like a beta launch. Like it's gonna
Mm-hmm.
just be for people who work with me direct as like an added support, kind of like having an assistant that has a different point of view on life to
Mm-hmm.
like add some extra elements to the discussion of the coaching conversation. But yeah, I've definitely empowered anybody that I've set it up with to ask me questions based on the feedback and give me like critical feedback on the outcomes that they get. Like if they get something sketchy, send me a screenshot, then I can look at like improving it and whatnot. But I think this is like a huge missed opportunity for a lot of coaches who might be just like using AI to make their content or using AI to tell them what to do and then they go do it. This is where we can work in alignment with technology to almost provide a bigger embrace around people when it comes to getting them from point A to point B. But then I'm going to segue us to creatine because I love
Sure.
how we're keeping this going and I want to pack in as much as we possibly can. So a lot of the conversations that I have with regards to creatine, and it seems hilarious because of how much I feel like I post it on social media. I feel like it's become one of the things that I talk about the most. I've created a fictional character called Don Creatino, and that's my nickname at Jiu-Jitsu now because that's what all the
Oh,
Jiu-Jitsu
nice.
guys know me for. But we're gonna create a scenario here, and for somebody between the ages of 40 and 90, would you be able to make a case for why they should not have creatine to help them get more clear on perhaps why maybe they should have creatine?
There's only three cases that I can think of outside of like extreme outliers that would be why you would not do creatine from age 18 to age 100. If you have an autoimmune disorder, if you're allergic to creatine, actually four. An autoimmune disorder, if you're allergic to creatine, if you have kidney disease, or you have asthma. If you don't fall in any of those categories, you should be on creatine. And this doesn't matter if you lift or not. Everybody should be.
Hmm.
There are too many benefits to creatine monohydrate. It's too cheap. There are too few side effects. And so literally everybody should be taking it. And it's really funny. I know that there are a lot of professionals these days, and I actually am really good friends with a bunch of professionals who their stance is, we should really be focusing on fitness and nutrition and all those different types of things. And if we recommend things like creatine, well, then we're bringing their focus away from what we should be focusing on. And I don't really share that stance. And I don't share that stance, not that I undervalue fitness and nutrition, because obviously that's the vast majority by far. But the buy-in for creatine is so low. It's so easy to take. There are no side effects really. It's just like it's not a supplement that like you can look at like these influencers and you can say, "Oh, it's not like AG1, it's not like collagen, it's not like all of these other supplements that like have these massive markups and these massive margins. Like nobody's making money off of creatine. Like nobody is. You sell creatine because you want to make money off of the other supplements that you sell. That's why people sell creatine. But I have no problem recommending creatine because there's there's like no risk that the person's trying to con you by selling you creatine. It's the most backed supplement of all time. It's backed for so many different potential benefits and so little downsides and so little cost that it's like, why wouldn't we just tell people to take this? I don't see it. It seems really interesting to me when people get really upset about, oh, somebody's recommending creatine. And it's like, why wouldn't you? Like, you would only not recommend creatine to cut off your nose to spite your face. And so I don't get along. I don't get within that mindset, but I think that literally everybody should be taking it outside of the four instances that I recommended.
Mm. And I mean, I definitely share that sentiment, which probably goes without saying. The thing that comes up for me is a lot of the times I'll have conversations with people who aren't in the same fitness ecosystem. So they don't get that same exposure to like what creatine is. Like a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people will see it in stacks that bodybuilders might use, or they'll see it associated with other substances, or they'll know of people who have referenced creatine as part of their lifestyle and quickly assume that it has correlations to that person's like early death or poor life choices or anything that they ever complained about must have been because of creatine.
Sure.
When,
It's like gateway drug.
yeah, like when you are having discussions with people who are more separated from the fitness space, what is your way of, I guess, familiarizing them with our gateway drug?
I would first ask them if they have any hesitation surrounding it. What are the barriers to taking this for you? And then I would listen to what they say there, because usually you're going to get some really good information from that. And if you're telling me that there's somebody that's trying to work with you that seems kind of resistant to taking it, 99% of the time, it's going to be someone that says, well, I don't want to bloat and I don't want to gain weight. 99% of the time. And then that's where you can kind of shift and address the concerns that they have. Yeah, I think that trying to espouse the benefits to somebody that's already resistant is probably not the right way to go, because I don't think that they're not wanting to hear the benefits. They want to hear that their concern is not a concern.
Hmm.
And so ask the person what their concerns are over the product, and then address those concerns, because it's very easy to address the concerns as far as creatine goes. And it's even easier as of like last month. And so, one of the basically the only thing that I ever hear as like, I don't want to take it is I don't want to gain weight. I don't want to bloat. As far as we can tell, you don't really bloat on creatine. Nobody does. If you're taking a proper amount and you're not going, if you're not doing like a loading phase where you're taking 20 grams all at once, nobody bloats on creatine. And this is a big thing. This goes back to like, you don't know your body. And I guarantee you there's going to be some people listening to this and they're going to be like, oh, I know my body. I bloated when I was on creatine. It doesn't seem like you did. We had a study that came out last month, and they found that when you give people creatine, or when you give people sham, something that's not creatine, just an inert powder, the same number of people will tell you that they're bloated on it. And so it appears that the bloating feeling is an expectation effect. And so we don't really see differences in bloating whether people are on creatine or not. It's just people will tell you that they're more bloated when they take creatine. So, they hear in the back of their mind that this is going to make you retain water. And it does, but that's a feature, not a bug. It's one of the reasons that it works because of the intramuscular water pull. Now, that's how I explain it. I mean, it is an intramuscular pull of water, but that's a good thing. It gives your body shape. It's the difference between a peach booty and a crack model, a 1980s crack model booty. And so if you want that really fat, butt that has like no shape and your back just goes straight down into your butt, well, sure, don't get on creatine. If you want a peach booty, creatine will help with that. And because it's intramuscular water weight, it just makes your muscles look more shapely. It doesn't make you look fatter. It doesn't put this like layer over top of the muscles. That layer over top is body fat. So if you want to get rid of that, you need to lose the body fat. But the creatine itself is only going to help in that process. It's only going to be helping in that process through improvements to overall health, through improvements to performance over time, improvements to heat tolerance, potential improvements to the brain, potential improvements to injury resistance. There's just so many things that this can aid you in, and so the concerns that we have seem to be vastly overblown outside of people that might be allergic to it.
I like that. I mean, I think that broke it down well. And the next question I'm going to transition this with, because I think it aligns with a person who may be kind of in an exploratory phase of what are their next steps in life, how can they best take care of themselves based on the information that they have. Let's say we're in a scenario where you, at your current age, all of a sudden went back to as if you had a training age of 0, and you felt extremely low energy, nutrition was subpar, your non exercise activity thermogenesis was basically next to nothing. Over the next 30 days, what would you do if you were in that situation, knowing all the things that you know, but having to build up from ground zero?
I would prioritize nutrition and sleep. I mean, this is not a long answer for you, but that's what it typically is. So what you're telling me is that you're essentially saying, with all of the scenario that you postulated, that my recovery is shit. And so I need to adjust for that, and I need to figure out why my recovery is bad. And if your energy is down, if you're experiencing all these things, I mean, it could be maybe there's a lot of stress in your life, and then you need to address that stress. But if we're talking about the fitness and nutrition protocols that we need to do, sleep and nutrition are really going to help that a lot. And this is assuming that you're not doing a training program that is like much higher volume than what your body can handle, because then the answer is you need to adjust your training volume, maybe in addition to adjusting your nutrition and your sleep. But the reason that I immediately went to nutrition and sleep is 90+% of the time, that's the issue. Even with really good nutrition and sleep, you can handle a lot of volume in many cases in a training protocol. It may not be necessary from a progress standpoint, but it's probably not going to lead you into feeling completely worn down. What's going to make you feel completely worn down? Not sleeping, not eating enough, not handling daily stress from your life, your social life, your job, your significant other, whatever that is. So these things all need to be addressed. And if you can address these, you're going to be able to recover a lot better. You're going to feel a lot better, and then you're going to be able to progress a lot quicker.
I love that. And then within the category of stress, because everybody's going to have a different perspective on it. For myself, I've definitely found like my pursuits in fitness have been an absolute game changer for my ability to handle and manage stress, and that I don't try to eliminate stress completely, but that I just find ways to stress about the right things.
Sure.
From your perspective, how would you help somebody make the shift from kind of staying frozen in their current state and maybe numbing the stress to facing that stress head on in ways that align with betterment of their physical health?
I mean, it's going to be dependent on the individual and what that individual stressor response is. How can we make this a productive thing? And so, most of the time, what I would do is I would have a person focus on habits and their routines in their daily life. If you can start to use your habits and routines as fallbacks, then you're going to be very successful, because whether you're stressed, whether you're motivated, it's going to help carry you through. And usually, stress comes about for a variety of reasons, and it's oftentimes that we lack a feeling of control that we want. When we don't feel in control of a situation, we get more and more stressed. So the first thing that I would have a person do, the simplest, dumbest crap that you can do that works is usually the best answer. And one of the things that I like to tell people to do is ask themselves, what would a healthy person do in my situation? Super stupid, super available to do anytime you're doing anything. Because a lot of the times we have a general idea of what a healthy person should be doing, even if it gives us anxiety to take that leap. So when you ask yourself, what would a healthy person do in my situation? It actually cuts through the decision making process and it removes a lot of the procrastination that we have. Because when it cuts through that and we say, well, a healthy person would probably just go to the gym instead of lounging on the couch, or a healthy person would meal prep instead of leaving things up to chance. Well, you might not want to do it, but you've just given yourself an answer, and then you don't have to fight with yourself to be able to make that happen. So you're essentially removing barriers and making things as easy as possible. Literally the best thing that you can possibly do in your life. So along with things like, hey, what would a healthy person do? Set up a pregame routine in your daily life to start doing things that you want to do, but you've not previously been able to do with enough consistency. And a pregame routine is a series of actions that you can do that starts off with something that's very easy, readily available to do, and then builds up to more movement. As an example, pregame routine, you want to start working out more, but you got a stressful life. You are, you get done from work, you get back from work, you're finished, you just want to sit on the couch for a little bit. Well, start setting up a routine and do the exact same thing every time you get to the gym. So the first step in your pregame routine could be mixing a pre-workout, setting your clothes out the night before, whatever it is. Then the next step, getting your keys and going to your car, getting on the road. And then finally, it pays off with you getting into the gym. Whether or not you feel motivated that day, continue using this style of routine and just drill it in. You're going to have to force it for the months in the beginning, and that's okay. But if you start to do this, it starts to go on autopilot. It's like knocking over a domino. You do that first step, and then all of a sudden your brain starts to get into that habit or that thought process of, okay, well, I'm going to go work out. And so by setting yourself up with these routines, you actually make your life a lot easier because it rewires your brain to start that first step. And then all you need is the energy to start that first step. And it's funny when you talk to coaches, whether it's about losing body fat, whether it's about building muscle or whatever routine that you want to build, people talk about willpower. And the 1990s coaches used to say, hey, if you're not succeeding, it's because you don't have enough willpower. And then somewhere around like the 2010s, we kind of shifted. And then coaches started saying, oh, it's not about willpower. It's about all this other stuff. It absolutely is about willpower, but it's not solely about willpower. You and someone that is very similar to you likely have similar levels of that willpower battery, but other people that are more successful are draining it a lot less. And setting up things like pregame routines and getting habits, and your daily routines under control drains your willpower a lot less because it's just something that you start to do on autopilot. So I really emphasize to people when you start to get into these new routines that you're trying to change your life, you're trying to get into new health status, you're going to have to force yourself to do it as much as possible in the beginning to build that consistency and that adherence. And that's okay. That's the way that it goes, but it does get easier over time. And people have heard the phrase, it takes 30 days to build a habit, or it takes 90 days to build a habit, or whatever. It's different depending on who you're talking to and what they claim. But when we look at the research, it takes between about 18 and 254 or 256 days to actually build a habit. So you may get it really quickly, but it also might take you the better part of a year. And just because it takes the better part of a year doesn't mean that you're doing anything wrong. And I want to emphasize that because if people hear, oh, well, it takes 30 days to, make a habit, and then 2 months in, it's not autopilot for you, you might get down on yourself. But that's not what we see in the research. It takes time to build habits for many people, particularly when it's very different than what you've done in the past. And a lot of times these fitness journeys are big things that people are trying to take on in their 40s, 50s, 60s. And it can be a difficult thing. And so by looking at this as, oh, okay, well, I can achieve this. It's just going to take me becoming more regimented for a time, and then it's going to become easier. It really does. But you have to know that that's going to pay off. And in the same research, when we look at it, even if you're trying to establish a routine, like going to the gym at 5 in the morning every morning or whatever it is, even if you screw up and don't make it in for a training session, that's okay. As long as you come back the very next opportunity to do that habit and you make it work, it does not throw off that habit formation process. So you can screw up, And I want people to know this. You can screw up. This is not an all or nothing thing. This is an all or something thing. So when you have an issue with a situation where you think that you've screwed up, just get back on track. There's no harm, no foul. You don't need to beat yourself up over it. And that's what we all do. That's the thing. We all do these types of things, even your coaches. But if you know that if you get back into play and you start to make the habit more solidified and it's going to pay off, that makes it a lot easier to put that effort forward. And then over time, we're draining that willpower battery less and we become more and more successful and it becomes more fun. And we feel like it's more of our choice and we feel less stressed over it. And that's the ultimate place that we want to take ourselves. But knowing that it takes time to get there is number one, important. And two, setting up some of those routines and habits to actually make that happen are the big focuses that we should have. Because if we do that, it's all going to work itself out and we don't have to stress over it anymore.
I mean, once again, so many things to take away. And the thing that I want to put some focus on is you talked about having a person think to themselves, what would a healthy person do? And the cool thing is that a lot of people who have sent me messages after listening to the show or have just shown that they're part of the audience, they are people who I would consider to be very healthy people. Like they're my most dedicated people who've worked with me for years, either in person or online. They're friends in the industry, or they're people who have been sort of connected to me in a sneaky way where they've never reached out, but they've listened year after year after year. That said, they may, and in most cases do, find themselves as the healthy person in their like social circle. And so they can sometimes be faced with this sort of like discomfort of like, what's the point of being the healthy person? But they don't always get to experience the impact that they have on other people. Like sometimes I find myself in that situation where I'll think of people that I know that aren't in the fitness industry and I'll
Mhm.
think like, is there a point to leading by example? And then later down the road, somebody will tell me that they walked like twice as long as they normally do because they thought, what would Chris do in this situation? And then I see the point to it. That said, if you were supporting someone who was the healthy person in their life and everybody around them kind of didn't seem to have the same priorities and they wondered what was the point, how would you support that individual?
So usually what you're getting at when you have this type of thing is there's two aspects to this. One, if it's really important to you, it shouldn't matter what other people are doing to begin with. But usually when we start to talk about this thing, are you hinting at the fact that there can be lifestyle criticism to this? And what I mean when I bring that up is people will often start getting started on a fitness or health journey, right? And then they find that they don't have as much support from their friends and family as what they thought before. Are you kind of getting towards that, or is it, how does a person stay focused on what they want to do long term?
I would say anybody that's made a lifestyle change often gets met with a certain amount of resistance, so we can definitely speak on that.
Okay. I mean, dealing with lifestyle criticism is a very, very real thing. And it's something that I think a lot of times stems from what you're doing is making other people uncomfortable. And I don't think that that necessarily is something that reflects on you. I think that this reflects on them. And I think that the problem is that when people start to make this lifestyle change, the way that these people react to them makes it feel like it's their fault. When in reality, it's probably the person's fault that's experiencing this. And so what I would first do is I would let these people know how important it is to you. And if there's somebody that's really close to you, I would explain why this is happening. But I would be very conscious of the fact that a lot of times that this happens is because these people, when they're watching you make a change in your life, it makes them feel guilty. It makes them feel maybe inadequate. It makes them feel like maybe you expect them to change. And that doesn't have to be the case. Even with significant others, you can say, hey, I'm doing this for myself. I want to be healthier. I want to have a better body. I want to feel better naked. I want to, whatever it is, the reason that you're doing this, and emphasize that this is about you. This isn't about them. But for people that you are close to and you value their opinions, I think that the best thing that you can possibly do is ask them for support. Once you've explained why you're doing this type of thing, say, hey, look, I would really, I don't expect you to change. I would really appreciate if you could give me some support here. And I've seen this work out really, really well in a lot of instances. Maybe a significant other wants to get pizza every Friday night, and you say, "Hey, you can get pizza, but please, I'm trying to do whatever I want to do." And that's not to say that you can't ever get pizza, but maybe sometimes you're saying, "Hey, maybe I'm going to lower the frequency of how often I do this." And by conscripting them essentially as an ally in this journey, you are removing for them what feels like judgment, and you're asking for their help. And people are usually pretty good about providing help when they feel that it is not a display of you judging them. And so a lot of times I think that this comes from the fact that people will think that this is criticism. And so it's an insecurity showing. And yeah, I would be very conscious of how that can affect them, because they're going to essentially and maybe subconsciously lash out at you. And I see it happen all the time. I mean, everybody that's coached somebody long enough, coached people long enough, have seen that significant other that is a detriment to this person's journey. Oh, you can break your diet, just tonight, but then just tonight becomes Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday.
Hmm.
And so as a coach, you're trying to find that balance where a person has a healthy relationship with food, is improving their health, is progressing towards their goals, and is happy with the balance of all of these things at once. And oftentimes I can say, at least in my experience as a coach, these people are, they want to essentially not eat these traditionally off-plan meals as frequently as they are, but they're feeling guilted into it. And so by having this conversation, being confident in your choices and being patient with your significant others or the people that you love around you, you can conscript them into a an ally role in this instead of somebody that's an adversary. And I think that that's really important. Now, if you're like, well, it's a situation that I have at work, and Deborah is trying to give me these different things. Well, who cares what Deborah thinks? If they're not somebody that's really important to you, that's where you just learn to say no.
Yeah.
Learning to say no is a very distinct skill. And every time I bring this up with other coaches, I hear, well, I want people to think about what they can add to their diet and not what they can take away. I agree with that sentiment when it is an internal pressure. When you have an internal pressure of, well, what food should I choose? Should I choose the donut? Well, today I don't want to make a conscious choice to have a donut. I'm going to choose to have fruit instead. And you view that as, I'm adding fruit to my diet. I'm not taking away the donut. That's great. That's an internal choice. When the pressure is external, you have to learn to say no. That's a skill that is required when it's somebody else is pushing it on you. Saying no is a necessary skill in a fitness and health journey, because you're going to have to stand up for yourself. And if you don't say no in a situation where you really mean no, you're also losing autonomy in that situation, and then you're not making a conscious choice to have that food, and then you feel guilty afterwards. So it's not one of those switch to positive and, hey, I will actively have this donut even though I don't want to have it. No, that doesn't work in that situation. It works when it's an internal pressure. So being conscious of these two things can really help with making that decision. But that was a little bit of a segue off of what you had initially asked. But I think that the way to make this sustainable long term is to fully explain this type of thing to your significant others, to the people that really matter into your life, and make sure that they understand that this is not a reflection on them, because that's how you actually make an ally out of them instead of somebody that is going to throw you off.
Hmm. Absolutely. And it kind of got me thinking about over the last few years, I've kind of just lived an alcohol-free lifestyle where I find it
Mm-hmm.
was easier for me to keep up with the workload that I have and recover faster for workouts and just maintain the physique that I have by just cutting out alcohol. Just a simple decision. But when it comes to social situations, sometimes that'll come with a little bit of friction. And the quickest way that I could eliminate the friction and kind of enroll people onto my own decisions was to just kind of explain that it wasn't me thinking that they had to do something differently. It was just me creating a rule for myself that just made my life easier and kind of gave me more bandwidth to be with them, to spend time with them, etc. And so by enrolling them in this process rather than trying to keep it low key and be, oh no, no beer for me today, then when I meet up with like close family or close friends, then they're already prepared. They're like, do you want a bubbly? Do you want a Coke Zero? Do you want a water? Because I just gave them a little bit more context as to like what was the big picture equation when it came to me. and I just made sure that they understood that it wasn't some like all-encompassing rule that all people had to do this, but that it was just something that was important to me. And when you talked about that, when it came to like having people get a bit more support from their circle, I thought of that. And so hopefully people kind of got some tools that they could utilize.
Well, and alcohol is one of those really common things that we find is a challenge socially because people have always viewed alcohol as like that's the reason that you're going out. And unfortunately, I know that we don't consciously think of it that way, but I think that subconsciously a lot of people do. Like you're going out to drink. That's not what it has to be. You can go out to enjoy time with your friends. That is not contingent on alcohol intake. And again, this is one of those things that I'm not saying that you can never drink alcohol. What I'm saying is when you do drink alcohol, I want it to be your conscious choice. And this is how I explain it to clients whenever I'm working with them and I'm saying, hey, if it's a conscious choice, you're not making this because you feel pressured into it. You're not making it because you feel obligated to do it. Then you cut out the guilt afterwards. You can also accept the proper expectations that come with it. You know, if you're going to have 4 or 5 drinks a night, maybe you're going to be up a pound or two the next day. It just might be the way that it works out. And if we have those expectations in play, and you say, you know what, I'm still okay with making this conscious choice. And if I see the scale go up 1 or 2 pounds tomorrow, I'm going to be completely okay with it. Awesome. That's a good relationship with food. And I fully support you in doing that. You know, and as long as we're making those choices from a conscious perspective, it's not emotionally driven, and we're saying what we actually want to say and what we mean, then that's great. But a lot of times people will say, well, I don't mind drinking, but I don't want to drink as much as I used to. Okay, great. So make the experience about hanging out with your friends and not about drinking itself, because that's not why you really went out. I mean, if your entire purpose is to just drink, you can sit at home and do that. That's called alcoholism, but you could still you could still do that if that's the entire purpose, you know. And so what I want to do is I want to really frame this in a way that people can use this to say, oh, you know, maybe that's right. Maybe I should focus a little bit more on you know the conversation that I'm having with friends and building those memories and all those things that add value to your life. Now, alcohol can add value to your life when it's brought in play appropriately. So just make sure that you're bringing it in play appropriately, and then you're not going to suffer any of that shame or guilt that comes with that. You know, bringing it in from an emotional standpoint.
Totally. I mean, I've heard so many people make cases for either side, and I've kind of layered them into my own coaching philosophies. And one of my favorites is actually, I think it came from Mike Dola, and
Mm-hmm.
he kind of framed how like the one or two beer in an evening can be the catalyst for that clutch connection that you make in life, or maybe uh, I think he was talking about there was different social events that kind of led to him meeting his wife, which was life changing. And so you can kind of have like that that middle aspect of dabbling in some things and not having to cut everything out. But then at the same time, if somebody was trying to make a case for just trying to experiment with a alcohol-free lifestyle, and by no means this isn't me campaigning for one side or the other, but rather sharing the benefits that I've experienced. I used to have a few beer to kind of like calm my nerves and make it easier to do things outside of my comfort zone. But what I would find is it didn't have a strong enough correlation with the outputs that I was capable of. Like I wasn't nearly as well
Mm-hmm.
spoken or eloquent. I didn't think about things as deeply. There was so many things where I was shortchanging myself. So I realized that my outcomes would be better if I just got a bit more guts to just do the scary things, even if I wasn't sure about the outcome. And then I could bring that whole aspect of myself where I think deeply, I consider the consequences of my outcome or my actions far more, where I cause less harm to others through jokes that I might make, or I think about how others feel in a situation. If there's somebody out in the corner on the side and they are not invited into the group, I think about them when I'm more present. So it all kind of depends on like the season that somebody's at in their life and what's important for them in making these choices and whatnot. And it's just there are a lot of people who could put themselves in a position to just be a little bit more uncomfortable in good, healthy
Mhm.
ways, and do things where they aren't certain of the outcome. Like you can go and you can have your 5 beer in the evening while watching a hockey game, and you can be certain of the outcome. You're going night night pretty soon. Or you can go for a walk with somebody you haven't seen in a long time and talk about the tough things in life and get your non exercise activity thermogenesis up and learn how to cope with the emotional ups and downs of life, be able to talk with somebody who has a lot of common things that are coming up for them, and improve your physical and emotional health without going night night as soon as it's time to go to bed, kind of thing. All that to say, if you were going to encourage someone to do something that they were hesitant to do, something that they felt scared to do, or something that's in their best interest, they know it's in their best interest, but they have some resistance, what would be the way that you might kindly encourage them to kind of like go closer to that thing that they haven't done yet?
I'm going to say something that is probably going to be a little bit surprising, but I really think that people just need to jump in the deep end. And I'm saying this from experience. I've spoken at multiple conferences, given talks to hundreds of people, those types of things. And I don't like public speaking, but I never would have gotten over that until I started doing it. And so this is one of those things that there's never going to be anything that's going to make an uncomfortable situation for you all of a sudden completely tolerable immediately. The only thing that you can do is immerse yourself in that and then move to the other side. And so it's a funny topic to talk about because people are like, well, what's the trick? I think that visualization can be a very beneficial thing. Practice whatever you're trying to do as best as you possibly can before being in the situation. Um, if it's a situation like getting into the gym and you're less comfortable with the gym, well, you should probably get a coach so you are not going in blind and have a little bit of an example of like maybe demos of exercises, or maybe you're going to meet the coach there and they're going to show you there. But if the coach is there, then there shouldn't be a massive amount of um, anxiety to begin with, because they're going to be there to act as a parachute for you. But I think preparing ahead of time is really important. One, then two, realizing that you're just going to have to pull the band-aid off. And that's okay, because you're not the only person that's going through this. Literally everybody goes through this. This is how you start to learn new habits, new routines, new skills. I mean, it's like going to shoot free throws in basketball. You're going to miss hundreds of free throws before you get really, really good at it. Same thing. You're not going to hit that Bulgarian split squat the first time that you do it. You're going to say, I feel a little bit uncomfortable. I'm not as balanced. Well, that's probably why you should be doing it. Now you can regress that, right? But by planning ahead, you can set yourself up for some success. If you don't know how to plan ahead, this is exactly why you get a coach. They can talk you through these types of things. And I cannot um, undervalue how much a good coach is worth, because they will not only prepare you to be able to take on these things that you might have been a little bit wary to take on to begin with. They can provide that support for you, but even more important than any of those things, they prevent you from falling into traps that you would otherwise fall into. I mean, I know that when I work with clients, I think, okay, well, what's going to be happening with them 2, 3 months down the road if we continue with the practices that we're doing now? And you talk about NEAT, non-exercise activity thermogenesis, multiple times throughout this. Well, one of the big things that I always harp on my clients from day one that we start working together is, oh, we're going to keep a step count, and we're going to continually hammer that into play. And I hammer sleep into play with my clients. And so I'll have a client that'll start with me, and maybe they've got some excess body fat to lose. Maybe they're a woman that's 220 pounds and she's first starting out. And I bring up a little bit of a larger example there, because in the beginning, literally doing pretty much anything, you'll see results, right? You trade out some of the soda, the sugar infused beverages, and all of a sudden you're going to lose like 20 pounds over 2, 3 months or something like that. That's great. But if in the beginning we also start working on, hey, you know, even though you're losing at an adequate rate, let's start building that habit for that step count, that NEAT. Let's start working on sleep, those different types of things. Then you don't screw yourself up later when you would have otherwise stalled, you've started to build that habit up. So facing these challenges head on from the beginning is a really important thing. Getting a coach to be able to help you through that so you can identify what the challenges will be and start to address them early is really important. And like I said earlier, it could take between 18 and maybe 254 days to formulate some habits. So if you're going to need that habit in 254 days, don't start in 254 days. Start now and start building that as best as you possibly can. As long as this doesn't overwhelm you and make you, question whether you should get started or not, it's something that you should be working on. And then start to bring these things in piecemeal as you're able to. But I think that getting started, realizing that you're essentially just going to have to dive into the deep end or pull off the band-aid is probably proper expectations to begin with, because you're going to be doing a lot of things that you're uncomfortable with, and that's okay. You're not the first person to experience that. You feeling uncomfortable, there's nothing wrong with that. That's completely normal. But you're going to have to get through that in a similar manner to how everybody else did, even though you feel like you might be behind the curve. There's only one way to get past that. It's to get going. And so the biggest barrier to success for most people is taking that first step. Once you take that first step, that's where you can start to build that momentum. But you have to take that first step for it to start to work out. And that's where things like what would a healthy person do really, really helps, because it helps you take that first step. And then you can start to learn and get more comfortable and start to see incremental improvements. And once you start to see those objective improvements, the scale going down, your measurements going down, yourself getting stronger, yourself feeling more confident, whatever it is, and all these things combined, then it can be easier to continue to motivate yourself to move forward, because you're like, I am experiencing, success. And it's incremental and it's small and it's a lot smaller than what you hope. And it's going to take longer than you hope. But that's the way that it works. So one foot in front of the other. Get doing that, and you're going to be focusing on what's important.
Absolutely, and I'm glad that you took that approach to doing things that you weren't doing before, because if not for jumping into the deep end, I wouldn't be hosting this podcast. I wouldn't have this job. I wouldn't be in this role. Like, it took a big, big risk for me to get those first steps in, and it didn't go according to plan, but I just kind of kept putting one foot in front of the other. Something that I also wanted to highlight, you talked about public speaking and your kind of maybe nervousness, reluctance, hesitation to do public speaking. I got to connect with you at the Real Coaches Summit last year and see your
Sure.
presentation. I was sitting in front row, but I actually watched it twice because of how much I enjoyed it. So for you to have reluctance to do that, and then for me to have enjoyed it enough to watch it twice when I could have watched somebody else, speaks to the benefits of doing things that scare you. And so now hopefully the audience can kind of see the picture. They're like, okay, if this podcast was only possible because two dudes did something that kind of scared them, then maybe I should do something that scares me too.
Yeah, and I think that we get in our own heads. I think that when we look at these situations that make us uncomfortable, we view them as all these people are going to judge us, and this is going to be a really bad thing. And then you don't realize that like literally everybody goes through that. I mean, I know a person that went on to Huberman's podcast about 8 months ago, and I was talking to them, and they were super nervous about going on. And they were like, well, what do you think I should do here? What do you think I should do here? And we actually went over the entire discussion that they were going to have. And it's funny because you would think, somebody's going on a podcast as big as Huberman's, they're an established name. This should be something that should be, old hat essentially for them at that point. But the same thing that you're going through is what all these other people go through. And you just don't realize that that's happening. And I bring up this example because it's kind of an extreme example of this type of experience, but it's cool to see. I mean, it's unfortunate for that person, but we talked through and they did really, really well. But it's cool to see that we're all kind of human, and so getting past that human frailty is just one of the challenges that we face in life. And again, if you want to improve, this is something that's necessary, and that's okay. You're going to feel uncomfortable, and I guarantee you too, you're going to fail at certain points. No matter what endeavor that you attempt to do, you're going to fail. That's okay, because failure doesn't have to be permanent. It can be temporary. And those temporary failures, if you look at them as learning experiences, are some of the most valuable things that you can do, because that's how you hone your ability. And so failure is not an end point unless you make it an end point. Failure is a stepping stone to success. And I want people to really understand that, because we've all been through it and we're going to continue to go through it, and it's going to happen to you. And that's okay. It's part of the process.
Absolutely. And like one final little nugget that I'm going to tag onto this because I think it'll kind of make it relatable for anybody and everybody who listens to this. One of the pillars in my life is I'm very close with my family. I visit my parents basically every week, and I spend a lot of time talking to them. And I've been able to kind of get a perspective from their point of view, and they've been very candid with me that like they are still learning, and like they're in their 70s. Like where I would initially assume that they had everything figured out if my touch points and like conversations with them were limited, or where I would initially assume that they assumed that they knew everything. The reality is that they are aware of how much more in life there is that they don't know yet. And they are still
Mhm.
constantly learning and evolving, and they're making mistakes. Their progress isn't always progress, sometimes it's lessons. And they're constantly having times where they might wonder, should they have done this or should they have done that? What was the best decision? What's the best decision in the immediate future? Stuff like that. And when we are given the gift of understanding that nobody has it figured out, no matter how much we admire them, look up to them, want to be like them, want to trade places with them, it allows us to show ourselves some more grace. And in doing so, positions us to be that much more ready to do something scary where we're not sure of the outcome because nobody knows the outcome.
Well, I was thinking it was funny when you were talking about people like making mistakes and stuff like that. I think that if a big podcaster can sell you a $600 tub for ice, you can get into the gym and feel it. Like if they're that confident to sell you like garbage, you can get into the gym and you can have a good day, doing some bench press. Like there's far worse things that could be happening in your life, and so I get it, and I get why people are uncomfortable about this type of stuff, and I don't begrudge them for feeling that way, but I want you to understand that it's not that big of a deal. And I actually made a post today that would probably make people feel pretty good about this, and I'm going to butcher it because whenever I make like posts and quotes and stuff like that, I've got the ability to go back and kind of edit it and make it sound like really smart. But the breakdown for it was essentially that if you have this anxiety to do these types of things, and in this example I was using when people were getting into the gym, really really kind of understand that nobody cares about you. And that sounds like a terrible thing, but it's true. We're very egocentric. And so if you go into the gym and you've got hesitancy about getting into the gym, realize that literally nobody cares. And so you get in, everybody else is in their own head. You're in your own head thinking, oh, they're all judging me. They're in their own head worrying about what's going on at work, my boyfriend's treating me wrong, like all these different types of things that people are worried about. Nobody's caring if you're, stumbling a little bit doing a Bulgarian split squat. You're person B from the first scene in the movie of their life. And so with that, with the fact that nobody cares about you, comes some freedom. Because if nobody cares about you, they're also not thinking about you 20 minutes after they leave the gym. So that should give you the ability to say, hey, look, not only are they not judging me, they're not even thinking about me. And that's great, which means I can be the best person B that I can be. And so that helps relieve some of that tension. Now, sure, if I'm standing up on stage at a conference, you can't really pull that because people are staring at you. So you are the main person. But in most situations, this is a really reassuring thing because you know that I mean people, like I said, people are egocentric. We're very self-centered. And that's just the human condition. We're all worried about our own things, what's going on in our lives. We don't realize what's going on in other people's lives. It's not that we're like sociopaths or anything like that. It's that we get wrapped up in our own things. And so
Absolutely.
we've got our own worries. We don't need to worry about what everybody else is worried about. And so we're worried about ourselves, and yeah, so we're going to focus on that. But that exact same thing happens with all this different type of stuff. And even if it's you going out to party with friends and them ribbing you about not drinking a little bit, they're not really going to care that much. Like give them 10 minutes of them picking on you and yeah, it'll happen, and just be like, oh, okay, whatever, and move on with your life. If they're that upset, the next day that you only had one drink, then is this really that close of a group of friends that you had to begin with? It's probably not. And I get that there are situations like, going out and doing something for work and you've got to drink with a client or whatever it is, but your clients also don't expect you to get like completely bummed whenever you go out drinking. They expect you to just kind of hang out. And so, do it to the best of your ability, give yourself some grace and move on with life.
Yep. And I mean, there's trade secrets that people can utilize to kind of mask the amount of alcohol they've consumed. I've ordered slushies that were non-alcoholic while other people ordered the alcoholic version. I just asked the waitress to
Yeah.
bring me the non-alcoholic version.
Yeah.
But all that aside, we could probably go on and on for hours. I want to make sure if there's anywhere we can send people, where are the best places to send people?
Check out my
Of
stuff.
course.
Is that what we're
Yeah,
talking about?
100%.
Oh, sure. So, if you want to look up information about me, including a fully evidence based blog for fitness and nutrition, head over to Maui Athletics, MAUI. That's my company for fitness and nutrition coaching. Or you can reach out to me on Instagram at Dr. Allan Bacon. Just make sure that you spell my first name right. It's Allan. And I'm happy to help people out with any questions that they have about what we talked about today. And I'm sure that Chris is as well. So reach out to us when you need us.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for your time today, Alan.
All right. Thanks so much, Chris. I appreciate it.